should put that. Yeah, I think I'll put that out on everybody else. I guess I could put it on me since I'm talking. I'm just going to share my screen anyways. So I don't know why it really matters. Okay. So the Hangout started, and we've got more than enough time for everything here. So presentation today will be on Data Warehousing 101. Basically, this is a rather old presentation. I was telling these guys I think I did this in 2011, so this is a long time ago. But the good news is I've got a lot of new things to bring to it. And this presentation is all about getting DBAs ready for data warehousing. This is not going to solve absolutely, you're not going to be an ETL developer walking out of this room after going to this presentation. What you're going to be is if you're a DBA and you have to manage a data warehouse, you're going to be much better informed. And the whole goal and idea here is that everybody starts bringing in their own parts to this as well. We have several people here that's managed data warehousing for a long time. So please add in anything that you've seen as well. We want to keep the conversation going. All right, I think I was going to say normally we do introductions, but almost everybody here should know each other. But let's go around the room really quick anyways, just to make sure everybody knows each other. And then we'll get straight into this. And then if we have problems or anything, we'll get out early and we'll talk problems then. Ben, you're first. You're right up here.
Ben Miller.
Seriously, that's it? It's like the first time he's been to a users group.
I'm a database guy.
Name, where you work.
Oh, Nature Sunshine.
What you do. Database guy is fine.
Database guy.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Brandon, a little better than him, please.
I'll try to get a notch above it.
Yeah.
It's going to be a hard climb. Brandon Priest. I'm a database team manager at Sorensen Communications.
Okay.
Ben Gosnell, junior database administrator at Extra Space Storage.
Under your wing, I assume.
Yeah.
Cool.
His minion.
His minion.
Was it last week? 2 weeks ago?
You only started 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And you're at a user group meeting? You rock. You need a gift card or something for that.
I'm like, hey, we need to go to the user group.
That's yeah. Give him a merit badge for that.
So I'm Ryan Russell. I'm a DBA at Extra Space. Also.
Okay, go from the back.
Sam Jones, I'm a DBA over at USOE, State Office of Education.
Mike Thompson, DBA, State Office of Education.
Ari Lee, MySQL DBA for Michigan Crediting and Lead. However, they took away all my database privileges, so I am job hunting.
Okay. Yeah.
Daryl Henderson, database developer, health equity.
Lars.
Lars Rasmussen, DBA, Health Equity, Utah Posh DBA on Twitter.
I'm John Backrose, I in Spain.
Database lover of data.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. We always like people that love data. All right. So I'm Pat Wright, help run the group. Worked in SQL Server for a really long time. Way too long that I really should stop mentioning it. Almost as long as Ben up here, if you want. SQL Asylum on Twitter, blog SQLasylum.com. I haven't blogged in many years now. I think it's been over a year, so I'm pretty bad at that. So what is data warehousing? Let's start with these definitions again. I'm going to talk through most of this. I'm going to try to do a whiteboard demo, but I don't know how I'm going to share that on the screen really well. So we'll see what happens there. But what is data warehousing? Data warehousing, by definition, is some sort of large repository. And I say by definition is some sort of large repository because people define this differently in many, many different ways. So these are very basic terms. These are things you're going to hear about them. They don't have to be in a third normal form. They don't have to be in the Kimball method. A data warehouse can be nothing more than a collection of very large databases, a collection of very large tables. Different companies do it in different ways. For our purposes today, we're primarily going to talk about Kimball's and we're going to talk about third normal form and those sort of things. But please keep in mind, everyone determines this differently. It's something that can be accessed by the entire organization. It's something that everybody uses in the entire organization. And I always hear the words one source of truth. Now, does that mean that it's always correct? No, it just means that it's the one source of truth. Everyone believes it is correct. Okay, so a lot of people say, well, if it's in the data warehouse, there's no way it can be wrong. Well, that's not true. You have the opposite problem?
Yeah, no one believes the warehouse.
No one believes the data warehouse. Okay, so that's another bad thing about it is sometimes what happens is the data warehouses pull the data over, but they don't do enough data quality or something happens and you end up with a source of truth that is wrong and nobody trusts and has faith in. That's a very important thing to try to get out of, that's for sure, but it's very hard to do, okay? What are some of the other definitions people would give for a data warehouse in general? Things that you have heard or things that your company does with the data warehouse?
An archive.
An archive, okay, that is absolutely a possibility as well. Sometimes data warehouses are used as archives and not necessarily query repositories. They just store lots and lots of data in the past and nobody really ever touches them, they're just an archive. That is another option as well, okay? Any other definitions for data warehousing?
It's common to have the data in aggregate.
Data in aggregate. So we'll get into a little further into it, but you make a good point. Some of the data in a data warehouse is sometimes raw and sometimes it's in an aggregated or counted form. So data warehouse can contain detailed data. A lot of people will say, well, they really don't have detail, they just have the aggregates. Well, no, they probably have both. It just depends on the situation of what you're doing. Excellent point. Okay, what's business intelligence? This one I used to laugh at a lot because most businesses don't have intelligence.
It's an oxymoron.
Yeah, that's right. It's an oxymoron. But the idea behind business intelligence is not a bad thing. It's just using data to make informed decisions. If you've heard me talk about big data, this is the same thing. In a lot of ways, you are taking data that you have and making informed decisions about them. Okay, so that's really all business intelligence is doing. It's got a fancy name. You get a much higher salary if you know how to do this and those sort of things. But is there anything different than, hey, I queried my SQL database and got an answer and then I made a decision off of it? No, it's just another way to do it. Okay, so business intelligence by itself is not some huge, really cool thing that everybody has to have. It's just another way of saying we're making decisions off of our data. Analyzing forecasts, budgets, make decisions all off of that data. So business intelligence, some of the new things you can do is when we talk about things like new tools that are out there in the open source world, Spark, Hive, Impala, Tez, all of these different tools can allow you to do things like business intelligence, but one, it may be on larger sets of data and it may be a lot faster and it may have a lower cost. So I'm putting into the presentation kind of different ideas about things that you see now as well and some of the tools. Some of the tools that are normally equated to business intelligence are cubes, SSAS, SSRS, those sort of things. For the open source world, you would talk about Spark, you would talk about Hive, you would talk about Tez. All of those sort of tools are usually used to figure out large questions and answers to those questions. Yes, sir.
I haven't heard of Tez.
Tez.
I'm assuming that's another one of the bolt-on things that we do.
Correct. Tez, the question was, what is Tez? Tez is an open source tool that's put on top of Hadoop that looks just like Hive, but it's more of in memory. Now, it's a little more complicated than that. I simplified that. But basically, it's trying to do a very similar thing to Hive, but a lot more in memory and a lot faster than other tools. Okay? Any other questions about business intelligence in general? Or any other comments to what you've seen has been called business intelligence besides what I've mentioned? For those just walking in, make sure you add your comments or anything. I love to hear, and I want people to talk about things. Okay, so this is where I typically go through a nice big flow on the board, and I'm not going to have an easy way to do that, but we're going to talk through it. So the data warehouse process, and again, this is all from the DBA perspective. I'm trying to give you the starting points, the things that you need so that you know what to talk about as a DBA and what you should be worried about. So as I go through each one of these, I'm going to bring up different topics that a DBA should be concerned with and what you can do. All right. Business definitions. This is one of the most important parts of the data warehouse. As we mentioned just a little while ago, if you don't have good business definitions, your one source of truth is going to be wrong. because it doesn't know what it's actually supposed to tell you. So a lot of people spend a lot of time in this phase getting all the business definitions decided, saying what is a customer, what is an email address, what constitutes an order, all of these sort of things. These are the things you have to answer inside your business definitions. From a DBA standpoint, this really isn't something that you have to worry too much about, besides that you hope that they got all those questions correct. They got all that data correct, because when it comes over to the data warehousing side, it's going to be very difficult to say this is correct or this is not if you don't answer your business definitions correctly. You want to add anything to the business definitions? Like I said, for a DBA, there's not a ton to do here because you're not usually defining this. This is your company defining it and telling you what to do. Okay? ETL, this is what the DBA should worry about, one of the most important things. How many people don't know what ETL stands for? Okay, everybody does. So we'll break it down into its steps. Extract. So when you're extracting for a data warehouse, typically, in many, many cases, you're extracting from a normalized database, right? We've got orders, we've got shippers, we've got tracking tables. We have all those wonderful things that as a DBA we always have. And you're writing stored procedures or views or queries to bring all that data together into one table, what we typically call a staging table. A staging table in the data warehouse says, this is the data I have to move from one place to another to then work on it. And the funny thing about ETL is that what you're really doing is you're taking from normal form, third normal form usually, or whatever normal form you have, depending on your system, you're moving it to flattened or horizontal or denormalized, as we put it, and then you're putting it back to normalized form if you're doing a cube. So you're actually doing the process over and over and over again, okay? So the extract phase, typically this is where a DBA would see lots of queries, lots of indexes added, lots of things so that you could get the data out of your normalized database. And for anybody that normally knows, that's used to it, a normalized database is not good for what? Querying, right? Writing queries, right? 8 table joins, they're wonderful things. So when you have the extract phase, typically those queries are going to slow down your production system in some way, shape, or form, okay? There may be tools you have out there, tools like change modification, or what is the SQL tool called now? Is it just change modification, change logic?
Change data capture.
Change data capture, thank you. So you have tools like change data capture that can help with this extract because it writes it to another location, but you're still going to be querying that production system a lot to do what you need to do. Okay, so as a DBA, when you talk about the extract phase, you should be very involved with that phase. Make sure that runs quickly and fast. A lot of people also say, well, just use views for this. I've always kind of been against views, mainly because you're just running a second query on a table again, and those usually are not very indexed or quick. So I kind of shy away from views when I do this. I typically do extract phases and stored procedures, but I'm also been doing DBA work for a long time, and that's what I know best. So plenty of people view is not a bad thing, but I would be cautious if you're really trying to get performance out of it. I would look to a stored procedure first. All right, so the extract phase basically takes whatever data you have in that normalized form, moves it over to another table somewhere else. Now, you can take all the tables as they stand right there and then run the transform on it, but many times the way I've done it and the way I've seen other people do it is as they extract it, they push it into a table that's flattened out, a denormalized table. And that's really a question that comes up. Some people do it that way, some people do not. But when you go to the transform, you basically get to a staging table. That staging table is typically flattened out and denormalized. It's nice and horizontal, it's nice and flat. There's lots and lots of rows, lots and lots of columns. Okay? Yes, sir?
Is that staging table the same thing as an operational data store?
It can be. You have to make that decision when you're doing your data warehouse. So in other words, a lot of people ask me, do you query your staging table? Or do you keep it around so you can use it for queries like an operational data store? I have done that in data warehousing. I've done that in different times, and sometimes I have not. It just depends on the case and what you're using it for. So if you can reuse it for an operational data store or for querying, I suggest it because I do like to reuse that. But if it's something where you're only doing one batch at a time, or you're not storing it, or it's just not going to be performant, then you probably wouldn't. So that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay, so that transforming phase, besides making that normalized table, then you also have all the aspects of, okay, I've got to look up these columns. I've got to change this data. I've got to do a regex on this data. There's all these other different pieces that you're talking about transforming. And you can do that on that table so that you're going through it. If you're using a tool like SSIS, you would have different flows for every single one of them, different types. You'd have all the different lookups inside there. Or you can use set-based, where you would be calling from SSIS big stored procs that have lots of business logic inside them that say, do all of these things to all of these different rows. Those are two different options in the way that you want to do it. But either way, your transformation basically is saying, I'm taking the data from where it was before and I'm translating it into something else. This is another phase that DBA should always be worried about. There's a couple things here. One, size. These get very big and very large. Two, don't have to worry about that. Size. Two, lots and lots of insert transactions. Lots of possibly updates if you update the data directly. But lots of inserts, lots of reads, writes, lots of work that needs to be done on these sort of tables. These tables are good for things like SSDs or very fast disk or lots of memory. Things that this is where you're going to crunch all your data. You typically want to move this data off of your production system onto one of your data warehouse systems. That's what the transform is looking for. So as a DBA, you want to separate this as much as possible. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody?
Is this a good place for heaps if you're just doing a bunch of inserts?
It's an excellent question. So the question was, is this a good place for heaps if you're doing a bunch of inserts? So how you index these tables or tables, I mean this table or tables, is really a good question. If you insert and you move into a staging table and transformation and all you're doing really there is inserting, then yes, I would say you've got a good heap situation. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to have an SSIS process come along and want to do something to that data then, and you're going to need some sort of amount of indexing, or else it's just going to be too unbearable. So to me, the transformation step still has to have a balance of it has to have some sort of indexes, but maybe not so many. It's not going to look like what you would put on your extract on your normalized database if you had to run tons of queries. It wouldn't have 30 indexes, it would have 5, because you also control exactly what you're transforming out of it. So that's why I've tended to like set-based sort of data warehouses where I pull from my transform table a big set, and then I do work on it. And then I put that into memory or something like that so that I'm not hitting the table over and over and over again. But again, it's really comes down to what you're doing with it. But your transformation table has to have a balance. You're gonna have to query it no matter what. So have that balance there.
Can you explain heaps?
Heaps. A heap is a table without an index. Yeah. So, and for one thing, I mean, I'm a DBA, it's a habit. I probably put a primary key on just about every table I create, even if it's an identity. So I don't usually have a heap running around anyways, but in this case, that would be something where I would consider it, but it really depends on how you're going to query it. I mean, you got to get the data back out. You have to get it back out no matter what. So you have to have some amount of indexing on it. But how much? Yeah, it depends. Definitely not a clustered key on like a GUID or anything. That'd be a bad idea. Okay, so transformation. Any questions on transformation? Anything anybody's seen differently or run into as a DBA that they concern themselves with transformations? No. Okay, so outside tools of transformation, again, SSIS is usually by far the de facto standard in the SQL Server world for transformation. In an open source world or something like that, you would have tools. Again, a Hive would be one of those. Spark would be one of those. Drill, that is now out. All of these things can pull up data and then modify it in a large horizontally scalable way. So those are some of the tools you're going to use inside transformation. People talk about things like Uzi or Luigi. These are work schedulers. These are kind of like an SSIS frame that schedules all the tasks inside it. That's what Uzi and Luigi do. Okay, they run inside Hadoop and they say, hey, you've got these 50 tasks to do for your ETL or for whatever you're doing. Go do all these 50 tasks. That's its job. It's a scheduler. All right. Okay, so for the load phase usually comes down to taking the data from the transformations, all the data that you just processed, the millions and millions of rows, and inserting it into typically a third normal form star schema. Okay, a Kimball warehouse, if you're going that route, would be a star schema. That's where you would put it. That's where it would end up. You would put it in all of its lookup tables, and you'd put the data into its fact table. That's typically what comes out of a transformation. Again, in a normal SQL Server world where you're going to end up with cubes and things like that. So the load phase, again, from the SQL Server perspective, what you should be concerned with is that's heavy inserts, because basically all you're doing is taking what you just ended up with and inserting it. And you're usually inserting it into several different tables, lookup tables, fact tables. Depending on how complicated you go, there could be several fact tables. There could be hundreds of lookup tables that are dimensions. So it can get very deep and it can get a lot of it. But basically you're talking about inserts here. You're talking all about inserts. How fastly can we push the data from one place to another using insert methodology? So the faster disk you can have, the better. A lot of people pretty much have your transform and your load kind of on the same SQL Server 9 times out of 10. They move the data from the production system, they put it onto one SQL Server. You have another database that's your actual fact database, or I mean that's your actual cube database, that's a star schema, and you push all the data into there. It's very common that I've seen. I don't really see a lot of separate SQL servers for each stage, unless you're really, really big. Again, somebody's welcome to disagree with me if you have that set up, but that's how I've seen it pretty frequently. From the load phase, that basically just puts it into the tables, and then from there, you get into the reporting analysis, the cube phase, basically the building of the cubes. A lot of people will say the load phase is actually the load into the cube as well. So I'll kind of talk about both here in a second, but I kind of see them differently. I kind of see load goes into the actual structures that you want, and then you build the cube. And I kind of see that as a separate step. I don't see that as the load step exactly. Again, it's semantics, whether people want to say it is or not. Validation, this one I kind of put up here because after you load the data, you should have some sort of validation step. You can have a validation step in your transformation as well. Things like when I said earlier, when the business says, I should have 1 million customers, you should know somewhere that I can check and see how many customers I have. Maybe that's a query you go all the way back to your original SQL database and you say, I've got 1 million customers here. I've got to make sure I've got 1 million customers here. There needs to be some sort of validation. It would get you out of the position of, I don't know if my source of truth is correct or not. If you put in validation based on the rules that the business has given you, you're going to have a much cleaner system. So it's not in a lot of data warehouses or business intelligence, but to me, it's a crucial step to have some sort of validation that you know that what your business definitions came out the same way. Okay? How many people have done a validation inside their data warehouse? Okay, so a few, but they still got the wrong question. I mean, they still got the wrong answers.
We have spreadsheets where we say this is the roadmap, the source, the point sales system, and here it is in the warehouse. And they're like identical tables with no transformations, nothing, and you still won't believe the data. So we give up, like we're just moving on.
So you have other problems.
Yes.
Okay. If you get the chance, try to put validation into your data warehouse in business intelligence. You'll save yourself a lot of trouble in the long term, because what will happen is somebody, again, will question a number that they have in their database that's easy to find. But then when you try to find it in a cube, it's a lot harder. There's a lot more pieces that you have to do, a lot more querying, a lot more stuff you have to do. So by doing it at this step or doing it right before the cube, you have a better chance of figuring that out. Okay.
Is this the kind of thing you would use like T-SQL-T for, or?
T-SQL-T, remind me again what T-SQL-T is. That's the test unit testing, right? So T-SQL-2, that's more of a unit testing framework for the actual procedures you're doing. I mean, don't get me wrong, you could probably do it, but I would see this more as I would write some sort of SSIS steps in here that wrote stored products that called my transformation table or my loaded table, run some queries, get some numbers, and then go back over to SQL, go back to the original source system and validate it there. I see this much more as a checks and balances that my process, my ETL, did what I expected it to do. So it's a way of validating from source to data warehouse. It's doing what it's supposed to do. T-SQL-T is much more about saying this procedure I just wrote gives me a number or what I expect. Does that make sense? It's more of a unit test. So, okay, so validation is a good idea. Again, don't see it a lot. It's really not out there, but I can't stress it enough. It would be a great thing to put in place. So if you get the chance, do this. As a DBA, you can suggest this to your ETL and business people, and they can laugh at you and say, no, we're not going to do that. but it's a good idea to suggest. Reporting analysis. So what?
I didn't know we had that option to laugh at them.
You always have the option to laugh. So reporting analysis, basically reporting analysis talks about what are we talking about on the front end to do. But again, I'm going to roll cubes into this as well. Where cubes come into play is that after you've loaded your data into this star schema in the database, then you build a cube off of it. How many people here have built a cube before? Okay, only a few, not too many. Okay, the fun and wonders of building a cube. Basically, if you can point at a nice star schema and it's got foreign keys and it's got everything you need, cubes are pretty easy to build. But if you go further than that, they're a pain in the butt. Once you get into more of the advanced things, modifying dimensions, stuff like that, there's a lot of complexity to them. So, but reporting analysis, basically, this is where you're going to report off of a cube or you're going to report off of some sort of tables. You do have other options out there besides cubes. You can report directly off the operational table that we talked about earlier in the transform step. There's a lot of products out there now, Tableau, ClickView, and other things that will point to a big horizontal table. It'll pull it into its own memory and then report off of it. There's a lot of disadvantages to that. If you've ever ran a ClickView like I have on my box right now, they can take up to 8 to 10 gigs of memory to actually pull in the cube and do it on their own. So they're standalone, but there is options besides just a cube. Okay. The other part of reporting analysis, if you're looking at something in the open source world, this is where it's kind of thin and sparse. There's some applications out there, Pentaho, MicroStrategy, there's a few others that will query big tables or query tables like this and do something with them, but there's not a lot of, say, open source cubes per se. This is typically you're designing something on your own. They give you a lot of frameworks and plugins, high charts and different sort of charting things, but they don't necessarily give you the whole package right out of the box. SQL and Microsoft's done this pretty much better than anyone with Office, with SSAS, with SSRS, all of those tools. Okay, I'm not going to do the demo because I don't really have any good way to do that on the screen, but the demo is basically just me walking through the different stages and what you would do. Pulling data from a normalized database, putting it into denormalized, and then normalizing it again into a cube. All right, the reporting phase, this is what I kind of just talked about just a second ago. Flat table for detailed and SSAS reporting. So Lars, to bring up your point earlier, I've seen people say, well, we use our operational store, we go into our cube, find all these great summaries, but then when we actually want to drill down, we use our operational store to actually drill down. So you may get like a list of IDs from the cube and then actually go query that table to pull it all back, because it's a lot quicker than going all the way back to the source system and trying to pull it.
So they have more granular level data.
They have more granular level data in their flat table. It's in a good query structure. It's not 15 joins. It's, I found these 100 people. Now go to that table and say select star from table where these IDs are these 100 people, and it returns it, and that's it. So it's a quick way to find data in an aggregate form, but then still get to the detail as another option. I've seen that used a lot recently to be another way to get quickly to those things. And they're not, because what none of us want to do is go back to the big normalized database, running 18 table join to get those 100 pieces of data. Nobody wants to do that.
So when you say denormalized in the operational store, how do you normalize? Are you talking about one big wide table?
Typically, a denormalized table is one big wide table. It doesn't have to be one big wide table, but that is a frequent way of doing it. Now, let's be realistic. If we're talking about 1,000 columns, because you have so much normalization on the other side, that's not going to be realistic. But if you talk about something like an orders table and the order details, you're talking about 25, 30 columns or so, or maybe 100. That's not that big of a deal. Those are usually what the denormalized table are. They are flat, so that every order has every piece of data. Now that means it's duplicated. So your data is duplicated and it takes up more space, but it would be easier to query than a normalized database.
Do you, so I probably should have asked this earlier. Do you find yourself changing data types between, we'll say the first step, your normalized database, and then your denormalized database?
So the question is, do we find ourselves changing data types between normalized and denormalized? And my experience, I've had a hell of a time if I try to change those. I shouldn't. And typically when I do, it breaks my ETL and screws things up. So typically I will not, and I try not to no matter what. I would say that, have I seen it happen? After transformation, yes. Because some people will go and say, well, we don't want this as a float. We want this as some sort of special numeric that looks different. And so they do things like that. But just from extract to denormalized, typically you are not trying to change data types. You are trying to keep them the same. Has anybody seen any differently there? Like I said, anytime in an ETL that I've changed data types between my source and the other side, I've had problems, not success. Yes.
One of the things that we run into our point of sale system, our source, for some of our data, we have lots of sources, but one of them is an Oracle database, and the data types, yeah, they map pretty good, but some of them don't. And so you kind of have to say, well, what's the biggest, for example, some kind of number column, I'll look and say, what's the biggest number that can fit in here? Just make sure the data type on SQL Server will be able to fit that number, and then you won't run into any issues. So
That's a good
point.
point. Running some validation on your data before it comes across into your data warehouse to know what sizes you need. That's an excellent point and something that comes up frequently, especially if you have disparate sources of different data, Oracle and MySQL and Postgres and all the others. Yes.
So I'm trying to understand this to see if, as I'm job hunting, I'm trying to work into data warehousing and doing an explanation. I have one client that wants a ridiculous report, and the only way I determined 2 years ago to do it is I take their data and I have a table that's got like 200 rows, and literally I use 25 queries to pull data from other sources and put in there. So am I basically doing the ETL, or is that the transport portion there?
In a nutshell, yes. So what you've done is, let me see if I understand this correctly. I'll try to repeat it for on the phone. Is you've taken a table that has some sort of key that says, hey, this is all the rows I kind of need, the 200 rows. And then you're updating all the columns with different data all about that row so that you can aggregate it in a way to say this is all that information.
Right.
So what I call that usually is and I don't have a good term for it, but an update aggregate table, where let's say you had every day in the year and you wanted to know 50 different metrics. So you would run them horizontally across and you would just sit there and fill in every day all those metrics that you need to fill in over and over and over again. That's basically a way of aggregating. All you're doing is aggregating. You're just not putting it into a cube form or something else. Cubes can do that for you, but in other words, you're building an aggregate on your own. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is basically ETL, but you're never going further than, say, loading it into that table and then displaying it with some sort of tool. That sort of table is perfect for things like ClickView, Tableau, and Power Pivot because they love it when it's already in that form. They don't have to do any more work. A cube could do all of that for you. If you took all the detailed data, put it into a star schema, then the cube would end up presenting what you have already done. Does that make sense to translate it a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. So, and I've built those tables too before. Instead of going fully to a cube, it's a simpler process. It's not as scalable by any means. If we asked you to do that for 10 million rows instead of 200 rows, it would die. And so, or if you had 3,000 columns instead of 100 columns, you'd have problems. So that's where you have to think about what's the difference and where do I put those in place. But there's nothing wrong with an aggregate table like you're talking about. It's a completely solid solution to do that. Very custom. So it would be it might be harder to change it moving forward. But yeah, but otherwise, I mean, but ETL processes are not easy to change either. They're usually big, they're usually very involved, and so they're not easy to change.
I'm just trying to look for opportunities to say I have some experience.
Yeah, if you've built an aggregate table like that, then you've built your own little summary table related to a cube or something else. The cube just goes much further. It goes much, much further as to what you can do with it besides what you just mentioned. But I've seen lots and lots of people, I mean, all of us have done it before, that we've had a really large report. It's pulling 10 million rows. What do? We aggregate it at some stage of a table beforehand, so we're not trying to pull the 10 million rows. We limit how much we're pulling. That's all data warehousing is, just on a much larger scale for everything, okay? You're basically pre-processing data. All right, so reporting. Any questions around reporting? Like I said, I really consider Microsoft kind of the owners of this more than anyone else out there in the market. They have Office, they have Power Pivot. I mean, when it comes down to front-end reporting, nobody really does it better than them right now, and as integrated as them. That kind of comes with a bad part that you have to build the cubes and everything behind it, but I mean, even with Power Pivot now, you can do a ton with that without any cubes whatsoever. Really cool tool. So personally, if I had to as well, I do like ClickView. I use it on a day-to-day basis because I was trained in it and I understand it. But if I got into it now, I would probably do Tableau because they've got a much bigger market share than ClickView. So, okay. Other questions? I think I'm actually done. I'm only at about 40 minutes, so I'm not too short, but we can keep discussing more things. Yes?
Are there any, so recently I came across a trace flag that I don't really understand what it does. I want to ask about it, but are there other settings like instance-wide that you can do to help with, you know, these huge queries and chewing through lots of I/O? The one I'm talking about is it's large pages in memory. It's locking pages in memory. I don't know much about it.
So the question, not related to the data warehouse topic, but we'll answer it.
Well, I thought it would be related because if you're doing these huge data warehouse queries, what kind of instance settings can you?
So that does bring up a good point. So let me answer that, and then I'm going to sick Ben on the trace flag thing, so I know he'll know it better than I will. But to answer your question, does a data warehouse do really, really large queries necessarily? In the extract phase, maybe, but you still want to find a good batch method that actually works for you for your situation, because again, you're talking about your production database. If you were to write a query against your production database that took an hour to move your data to the data warehouse, I don't think too many people are going to be happy with you about that. So when we say they're large queries, they may not be large until they get to the transform and load phase on the data warehouse. And even then, you want to try to keep them relatively small so you can break them into many steps in SSIS, and then you can actually parallelize them more and more. So you actually want to break it into smaller pieces. You want to try to avoid really large data warehousing queries. So that answers that question in the data warehouse side. From the flag side, there is an instance, I mean, there is a trace flag for locked pages in memory.
It's not a trace flag, it's
It's the
local
setting,
security
locked
policy.
pages in memory.
Yeah, it's a local security policy.
Right. Which the best thing I can say there is Jonathan Cahias, look up his blog and read what he wrote on it. And basically that's it. Did you bring it up?
Oh,
No.
There is one source of truth for that memory and that page flag and everything about it, and it's Jonathan Cahias is the best person to read what he wrote on it. He has like a 3-page blog on it, and if you read through that, you'll understand locked pages.
Just say, do it or don't. Just do it.
I'm
No,
not,
you should always set it.
because you should.
That's where I'm at with it.
You should always set it.
Yeah.
You should always set it.
There's, I mean, when you're virtualized is the most gain, because in the virtual world, VMware or Hyper-V will want to steal RAM from the box. So if you don't set it, as long as a page is locked in memory by an application in the VM, it will not be able to take it. So all the balloon drivers and everything that they tried to tune, they will steal RAM back from a SQL Server if they're allowed to. So you always set it so that SQL will take and lock pages in memory. It used to be a setting only for AWE settings, and that was back in the 2000 years. Now AWE is gone. 2012, 2014 is gone. There's no such thing. It's still in there. It's still in the configuration because of backward compatibility, but it means squat. But the setting is still valid. It will still lock pages in memory when it can.
So I was just curious about that because I figured some of these queries were running on warehouse instead of it being one updated row like a transactional system. Now I'm doing a big report query, having it do that. Maybe that's a performance gain on larger queries like that.
No, you're misunderstanding the setting, but
Yeah.
I mean,
That's why I was
lock pages
asking.
in memory, yeah, it's more about when it doesn't need to use that buffer pool or evict it, it will lock the page.
Right.
But if you run big queries and you have a half a terabyte of RAM and you fill up that half a terabyte and then you do another query, it'll evict those pages
Right.
So it didn't lock them. It's not like set working set size or something like that. It's completely different, but it is a setting if you want to set it. But
And the reason I don't go with the anytime or things like that is because I currently have 2 production database servers running on 2 very large VMware hosts, 500 gigs of memory. Neither of them have memory pressure, and neither of them have that set. Because again, it does depend on memory pressure. It doesn't really come in until you start evicting. If I have a page life right now, I do, of over 2 million seconds, I'm not too worried about it. Rarely do I get down to that number where I have to concern myself with what those settings are. So that's why I go to his blog and I say, okay, I'm going to read through this and determine if it makes sense to me, and then do it based on that.
Well, another criteria there for me is, does it make the sysadmins mad? If yes, then I probably will look into it further.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, is that this is a local security policy. You will have to get with your operations team. You'll have to impress upon them why you should change it, because they're going to have a completely different idea of what it does.
Well, since we're talking about data warehousing, I do the same thing for my SAN. If my data warehouse takes too much room,
Yes.
too much space, I'm doing it correctly.
That's where I was going with that. If it makes them mad, I probably want to do it.
yeah, one other criteria for using it in a VM state is if you know from the sysadmins that they've overcommitted.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, okay, now hold on.
Undercommitted realm, you're going to run in a world where
Now
there is
that's-
no memory pressure, but
That's where one that I will say, and always, I have yet to run into a VM world that was not overcommitted.
but we have a VMware farm that's not.
Okay.
And so
That's-
that's a
Kudos to
luxury.
you.
Yeah,
Yes.
luxury.
Kudos to you. They're always overcommitted.
Yeah.
But again, when they're overcommitted, there are stats also in Perfmon and in VMware hosting or Hyper-V or anything else that says stolen memory. And it'll tell you how much it steals from each other. It's a good number to look at to say, am I actually losing memory to someone else? So it does make a difference. So we have an overcommitted VM section, but our SQL servers are alone on their boxes. So they actually do not get committed. They do not get stolen from. So it really depends. That's why I say it depends. That's why I said read the blog post. It's the best way to do it.
And when Pat says it depends, I say always. Just good.
Just to frustrate me.
It's okay. Yes.
He was trained by him, so that's why he's doing it.
He's not to give it away.
Okay, so other questions around data warehousing in general, or other things I'm open to as well, but I would love to hear if you have things about data warehousing.
So with data warehousing, are you typically just doing a dump and load, like over and over again, or
Okay,
just
so-
keep it updated?
So the question is, on data warehousing, are you kind of resetting everyone and pushing all the data over again, or are you doing some sort of incremental changes? I can tell you any large scale data warehouse is an incremental change. Anybody that tries to reprocess the entire customer over and over again will kill themselves sooner or later.
Unless they have a 5 gig database.
Okay, maybe a 5 gig database.
I'm just
Still, you're still talking about
That's totally heckling. Sorry. That's totally heckling.
9 times out of 10, you're talking about some sort of incremental change. And you're talking about a process that typically is batch related for data warehousing. You could talk nightly, you could talk hourly, you could talk, maybe once a week or something. Some people build them once a month if it's a really big thing. It just depends on what the business needs for their reporting and for what they're trying to do. Everybody's got different scenarios. Currently, the system that I run, we use Hadoop and Elasticsearch, but it's still an hourly batch. And it's not a data warehouse, but it sort of is, and it still uses an hourly batch. In the past, we did a nightly one for our system with a cube. We tried to build our cube nightly, and we ended up processing the entire customer every day, which was one of our major problems. We never got it to process under 13 or 14 hours. And there was a lot of other issues there, but
Then it would get continued longer and longer.
exactly, yeah, longer and longer. So most of the time, again, 99% of the time, someone's going to make an incremental load into the data warehouse. You're going to rarely reset. Now, sometimes you have to reset though. Sometimes you have to say, okay, we made all these changes, we made all these problems, we have to reload all our data from SQL Server and push it across. It may happen, it may not. It really depends on the data warehousing system that you're using and how you're doing it. So, anybody want to add to that? Most people, I'm assuming, do some sort of batch, some sort of incremental load. If you don't, I really strongly suggest it. Okay. All right, other questions, data warehousing. I told everybody was gonna get out of here earlier today. This is why I didn't bring you snacks today either. Well, actually, I just couldn't get here in time. But no other questions around data warehousing. As a DBA, those are the big things that you should worry about on data warehousing. You should worry about your extract phase, what it's doing to your production box. If it's running long queries, fix it. Teach them how to write better queries. A lot of ETL developers are just that. They came from development. They may not be DBAs. So they may write really bad SQL queries against your server. Be very careful about that. Some of them are very good, but it depends. Why do you two keep looking at each other about that?
Like you're talking about our situation.
So, well, I've done this a few times.
Like you're reading our minds.
Yeah. So for the extract phase, be very careful with your production system. That's really what it comes down to. And never be afraid to say to them that you have to move your batch or you have to do something differently to say, you're not going to hurt our production system while you run this. One of the tenets of data warehousing, in my opinion, should always be do no harm to production. It should be do no harm. That doesn't mean that they do it, but it should be. Also, data warehouses rarely should update the production system. That really have been in a few situations where that did happen, but 9 times out of 10, that should not happen because you're updating your master system of truth. And how are you ever going to make sure that you make what you're doing? So, but I have seen ETL projects that actually go back and modify the production data. It's a really bad system, but it did happen.
So is that like, I didn't like the answer, I got a new one, I want that one now?
No, they did the transformations and cleaning and then wrote it back to the production system. And what?
You have bosses in prison? Former bosses, sorry, former bosses.
I was just the DBA for the system, so. And I did everything I could to try to change it.
We need to stop the recording.
No. So do not update your production system. Keep the query small when you're doing your extract. When you're doing your transform, basically as a DBA, be very scared of large transactions on that data warehouse that may take a really, really long time. But if it's on its own SQL server and its own data warehouse, that might be the intent. You know, some of these things take 8 hours. It's just how it works. If it takes that long, unless they need it to move faster, there's not a lot you're going to do about it. This is where you can actually throw hardware at a problem sometimes and make it faster. It just depends on what they're doing. Because with SSIS, there's some tuning you can do, but not a ton. This is why I like to use stored procs with SSIS. If I use stored procs, then I can get in there and tune it. I can change things, I can do things. If they use the lookups and the methods inside SSIS, your hands are tied. All you can do is performance tune with SSIS, which is not that simple of thing to do. If you want to do that, Pragmatic Works, Brian Knight, go see those guys and do all you can. The last part, load is really, all it is a bunch of big inserts into the star schema and then building the cube. And again, when it comes to building the cube, to speed it up, either become a cube expert, which is not much fun either, or add more hardware to it. That's really your only options there. Throw more memory at it too. Cubes use lots and lots of memory. Cubes will query your database, pull all the data up into memory, and then process it. That's what it does. So I had a cube that took 286 gigs of memory, and we had 320 in the box or something. It consumed almost all of it. So, yeah. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I saw an instance once where the extracts stage, they used SQL Server replication, where they replicated the tables or the columns over
Yes.
onto the
data warehouse inside and then did the work from there. Yeah, okay, so
pretty normal, or
that is very, very normal. As a matter of fact, I would say that was very common before kind of doing SSIS yourself or something. I was in several scenarios where we used replication, replicated all the tables over, and then did all of our work on that other side. It's kind of a simple way to do it. If you've got one database with a reasonable amount of tables and stuff, it's not a bad way. If you've got 50 databases with a lot of tables, you're going to get into a nightmare of replication. And you'll run into all the problems you have with the replication. They fail. They don't work all the time. There's problems with them. If you change schema, you have to change it on the other side. You have to break that replication and reset it up. So replication is good. Don't get me wrong. It's just, you got to be careful with it when you're doing that much. The other common one now is change data capture. If you can take the time to write what you need against change data capture, that's another good way to do it. It's much more lightweight of what it's doing on the system. But a lot of common ways are, modified dates on triggers that are updated on tables. I have that in my current system right now. To find out when something's modified, we have a trigger that writes it every time it's changed. Or the application writes a column that says this was modified, and you pull from that. So a lot of different ways to do it. Replication you will see very commonly in the data warehousing world. I would say they pushed that for the first 3 or 4 years. That's all they pushed really was replication. Replication never scaled well when you're talking about lots and lots of pieces. I mean, we did replication at 1-800 and we actually hit the max limit of what could be replicated at the time because we had 7 databases and like 170 tables or something. And the desktop limitation was like 182. You couldn't load more than that many objects or something, some weird number. And we hit it and we stopped replication.
It just seems really delicate.
Yeah, that's what I get back to with it. So, and there's a lot of work. Like I said, if you're really trying to move all of it, it's a lot of work. So keep that.
It's hard there's so many ways that I think are easier than replication.
Yeah, personally, again, I'm a big stored proc and view sort of person that says pull what I need and pull it over there and then work on it because I have so much more control that way. And all you've got to do is get SSIS or something to execute it. So it's a lot more simple. It's the same as LDBAs tell you, don't do select star, only take what you need. When you replicate, you may be taking a lot of stuff you don't need. So only take what you need. That's key. Okay, other questions? I'll check really quick and see if anybody asked anything online. What were you gonna say, Ben? Nothing, no viewers. Okay, no other questions? All right, then I'm done. You're welcome to, make any announcements, hang out for a minute and chat about other things. I'm gonna just end the call though. Go ahead.
My question is this, I am an architectural